This is about coming from a slightly different direction. This is about how students have been reacting to using generative AI. And the first thing is to say that I don't think I've ever been aware of something moving so fast. So this time last year, we were in a position of what are we going to do about generative AI? What's the position of the Open University going to be in terms of saying students could use it? And, you know, a year on, we're in a totally different place. I think quite a lot of people, quite rightly, are worrying about the implications on assessment, and this wasn't really what we were worrying about at all. What we were interested in was how we could get the students to use it to help them. Now, because we're a distance learning organisation, you know, we don't have physical buildings where there are support centres going on. Students would be using generative AI if they were going to be using it really off their own bat in the first place. So a year ago, we were in the position of saying, okay, the university has decided that students can use generative AI, but they've said unless the module says a different, and module is our course. So our maths and stats courses on the whole said no, students weren't to use it. I think largely driven by the fact that one of the things we've just talked about is that, you know, it can be wrong and students have to have a level of knowledge in order to use it sensibly. So we decided that just one course, a second level undergraduate statistics module, would pilot using it with students. And using it with students basically came down to saying, you can use it in your assessments, and all of our assessments are formative until the final exam. So we said to the students, you can use it in your formative assignments, you can't use it in the exam, but we do want you to acknowledge that you're using generative AI. To help the students a little bit, we produced a document that was there at module start for them. We produced a recording of a tutorial explaining how they could use it. And then we set ourselves off to monitor during the year and try and support students in using information. Now, another thing perhaps that's just worth mentioning is that, you know, a year ago, it seemed to matter enormously if M248, which is this module, was going to do this. You know, what does everybody else in the school feel? How does it fit within the Open University? How does it fit within the sector and employability and general use? And, you know, a year on, that's all changed. There's no doubt. Generative AI is here. Students are going to use it, and it's about how
So,
to help them.
sorry,
Yep.
Carol, are you still on the first slide, or have you tried to move
I'm on the
on?
second
Okay,
slide.
yeah, it's because you're still not sharing your full screen. You're still.
Okay, it tells me it's screen sharing. Oh dear. Well, I can do most of this without. Wait a
Carol,
moment.
if you click on the bottom,
Yeah,
um, that's moved it on, I think, has it?
okay. It tells me I was showing you slide 2, which has got blue ovals on it, and if I click
Yep.
on the bottom, it tells me I'm sharing slide 3, which I haven't quite come to.
Okay, so you're on slide 2 now that we can see. So
Right, excellent. Okay, so I hadn't quite moved on. I shall speed up perhaps then in that case. I've only got 4 slides, so on the whole, there's not a lot going on the slides. It's a prompt to remind me what to say. So a year on, we're in a position of most definitely generative AI is here to stay. So one of the things we did to help the tutors, and our tutors are associate lecturers, there are 35 of them teaching this module. So they deliver our printed materials, if you like, to the students. They deliver it via a whole set of tutorials. They mark the assignments. And so we had to do a little bit of work with the tutors to help them understand what generative AI was, how it might be used by the students. We had to get them to understand that the students could use it according to the university regulations, but they couldn't use it in other maths and stats modules. And most importantly, the students had to acknowledge if they'd used generative AI. Now, the tutor bit is not the main focus of the unexpected outcome of this piece of work. The unexpected outcome was the students' positioning about it. So the easiest way for us as a distance learning organisation to ever find out what students are thinking is to put into our course VLE a questionnaire, and students are quite good at answering these for us. So as per usual, I put in a student questionnaire asking them about their use of generative AI. And now this is the surprise. First of all, there was a very low response rate from them. Normally we'd get a 15% response rate. I only got about 9%. Normally the students are used to, on the stats modules, we like anonymous questionnaires. We don't want to know who the student is. We believe the anonymous questionnaires will get us more interesting answers from students. And we tend to use free text questions quite a lot. And I don't think I've ever seen students refuse to give me their consent for their anonymous comments to be shared with other members of the module, other members of the course team, never mind within the school, never mind within the university or elsewhere. Students were amazingly wary of saying that they were using generative AI. So the chances of trying to understand where they found it most helpful were not looking good. And the third thing that blew me away from this questionnaire with the students was that I asked them, how did they use internet resources like Khan Academy, Maths is Fun, to help them understand the course materials? You know, we would always encourage students to try and understand course materials. Going to the internet is fine. And half of them, 52% of them, said yes, they use Khan Academy or Maths is Fun or something like that to help understand parts of the course materials. But only 25% said they use generative AI. I just don't believe a word of it. They're not prepared to say that they're using it, or alternatively, they have been so scared by the university that using generative AI could be plagiarism, it must always be your own work, etc., that they're not using it. So to me, a big worry. Here's a fantastic tool, you know, as Lou's been demonstrating, that could help students understand a new topic, say like a t-test. And they're certainly not willing to say they've used it. Is it that they don't need the help? And remember, this is only about using it to help them understand course materials. If I actually asked them, did they use it to help them in an assignment, you know, we're down 5–10%, very low figures, and our assignments are only formative, and they were allowed to, they just had to acknowledge it. So they're not using it, or they don't feel they need any help. I don't think it's the latter, because the second table on this slide is a table summarizing another thread that we had running, where we ran tutorials just to help students do the assignments. They were very specifically to help them do assignments. And assignment 4 is a pretty tricky assignment. Traditionally, we've had about 72% of students would submit it. For that particular assignment, there were 700 viewings of the tutorial explaining how to do the TMA, the tutor marked assignment. There's only 700 students. In fact, actually, a third of the students watched this tutorial, and they watched it repeatedly, which is how it got up to 700 viewings. But the net effect of that was we got our submission rate up from 72% to 78% for that TMA. So they do need the help, but they don't want to be using generative AI or they don't want to say they're using generative AI, even if it's quite clear they're allowed to. We did try and monitor where we felt students were perhaps using generative AI in their assignments and they weren't acknowledging it, because that was our one condition. They had to acknowledge they were using it. And we monitored that to see, did it look like any particular group of students were particularly prone to doing that? And there was nothing on the gender side, there was nothing on the ethnicity side. There was very, very clearly something about students who were perhaps overcommitted, students who were doing 120 credits. So that's like studying full-time, and they would have been working full-time, most of those students as well. So almost all our students are working as well as studying, and they've got care responsibilities, home responsibilities. So studying 120 credits at full-time study is really tricky, and students do it, but that group of students were overrepresented in those that we warned that they seemed to be using generative AI and they weren't acknowledging it. And they tended to be weaker students as well, but they were probably weaker students just because they were taking on so much study. So hopefully on to the last slide, which is what next? I would say the results from putting a questionnaire in our VLE, which is normally a very productive route for us, clearly show that students are not at the moment going to tell course team, module team members, possibly their tutors, possibly any members of the central academic area, that they're using generative AI. We have somehow scared them into silence about it. So the obvious thing is, well, would they talk to other students? If students were asking them, how have you used generative AI? How have you found it useful? What else would you like to be able to do? That's perhaps got some mileage. And the second thing that I think has got some mileage actually links back to something that Louis said. When I see Vygotsky, say it right, name, I always think of scaffolded learning. That's what it conjures up in my mind. And I do wonder if we can, with a group of tutors, show students in the tutorials how generative AI could be useful. So typically a tutorial will introduce a new topic, or will explore a topic, or extend a topic. A tutor will produce a new set of slides. They'll tinker with them every year. And we do now have a group of tutors who would be willing to try and almost take a role model approach for the students, saying, okay, here's a new topic. We've got the t-test, say, back to Louis' example. You've read the module materials, didn't make a lot of sense. Where are you going to start? Well, why don't you go over to generative AI, put this in. This is what I got when I put it in. I didn't find it very helpful, so I told it to be more concise. Oh, I told it to talk to me like I'm a first year undergraduate, and these are second year undergraduates. So talk to me like I'm a first year undergraduate, or whatever, and just show the students with very concrete examples, which that tutorial is about anyway, how they could perhaps use generative AI to get them started. And I think I'm okay. I think I've 2 minutes to spare, which is amazing for me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I sort of like to say, given Rachel's earlier comment, it's because I'm chairing this particular session. But no, that really was superbly done, and I think you've pulled out something here that we often look about. We don't focus upon that. We look at the technology and how we might use it, but actually there's a really big piece of work around the messaging to the students, and in order to kind of encourage their engagement. I think that's really starting to come through. I think a quick round of applause for Carol before we kick off some of the questions. But I really think you know the content that you've got there really is something we have to think carefully about, not just designing these tools, but designing the learning experience that sits around them. I've got one question here, which I'll kick off with, if that's okay, which is, have you got any idea about the proportion of students who've tried out these tools and found them either not to be useful or believe them to be untrustworthy, and then would rather go to more trustworthy sources? And if so, I'll add this bit in. What are those trustworthy sources that they use instead? So, sorry, quite a bit there.
Yeah, I think we do have a little bit of evidence, because that was one of the questions on the questionnaire. So with those provisos about very low response from the students and a very wary response from the students, I would say I had, let's say 25% of them said they used generative AI, and those that said they hadn't were saying, well, I have looked at it. On the whole, they were saying, I have looked at it. I'm sure it's useful for somebody. I'm sure it's great that the OU is thinking about it and trying to keep up with the times, but it's not for me at the moment because I don't think it's trustworthy. So that's what they told us in the questionnaire, that I would say perhaps 3/4 of the students who answered the questionnaire were saying, I don't use it because it's untrustworthy. I don't think that's true. I think I think a lot less than 3/4 of the students weren't not using it. Quite a few of them said they hadn't heard about it. They didn't know anything about it. But, you know, a year ago is an awfully long time ago on this topic. It's moving so fast.
Yeah, it is, and I think you know you've pulled out sort of a couple of points, and some of the things you're finding are mirroring what I'm sort of seeing elsewhere, that students are either not aware or they're a bit suspicious of these tools. But the big one I think you highlighted was that they still feel that they can be penalised if they will use them. Could I just ask something then, Carol? Because I get the impression, you know, you're very much in this. This wasn't just a one-year thing. You're building this in for future years. So what will you do differently, perhaps either in your approach or some of your messaging in the next iteration of this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so next iteration, I think we will change the first tutorial explaining to students how to use it, and the guidance documents. But I think for us in our environment, we try to encourage the relationship between the associate lecturer, the tutor, and the tutor group of 20 students. So what we will, I hope, be able to do this year is to say to the tutors, look, at your introductory welcome meeting, in your introduction welcome email to your students, say to them, it's okay to use it. You might like to use it. Go and look at these documents, you know, giving it their personal stamp of approval for them to use on the second level stats module, provided they acknowledge the usage. So hopefully we will have a lot more tutor led initiative, encouragement to use it, perhaps. And these examples that if we can get tutors doing some tutorials, taking a tutorial is an hour and a half long, to take 10 minutes out of that to say, look, this is how you could use AI on this particular topic is not a lot. And I think we probably got 5 or 6 tutors who've already signed up to do that.
Brilliant. We don't have any other questions there, so I'm going to take this liberty of putting you on the spot one more time, if I can, Carol, because I'm really quite fascinated with some of the things that you've highlighted. You mentioned there the role of staff kind of supporting and encouraging students around the use and sort of the narrative there. How have you found staff buy-in with this? Because one of the things that we're looking at, you know, we're rolling out training across the institution to help staff develop these skills. How are you finding that kind of message? On a staff really on board with it, or is there some skepticism? And how does that work? Because that really shapes the interaction with students, doesn't it?
Yeah, it totally does. I would say incredibly patchy. I would say over the course of the last year, more and more tutors have got involved, more and more tutors have been looking to see, do they think their students are using generative AI? They've been holding some good conversations with students about, well, actually, you know, what you wrote down here is wrong. And it's not so much that the generative AI answer was wrong, it was you were asking it the wrong thing. So some tutors, of these 35 tutors on this module, I would say 5 actively involved right at the beginning. By now, by the end of the course, I would say over half of them, 20 of them, actively kind of at least thinking about generative AI and how the students could come. Certainly not all of them. And that's after a year with them being sort of blasted with messages about how it could help the students. But on the other hand, I am really surprised to find that I've got 6 volunteers already saying they're willing to take time out in a tutorial to explain to the students how they could use generative AI on that particular topic to help them. How will we get the remaining tutors? Well, my guess is that this October we'll be starting off much better, because it's a clearer position for the university, and so a clearer position for the module, more experience. I think we'll start off with 20 tutors, say, actively involved, and we'll probably get 30 out of 35 actively involved by the end of the year. The other 5 we may never get. Being realistic, you know, they might just not be interested, and regard it as, you know, this answer doesn't make sense. I can see what the student's done. I'll explain to them why the answer is wrong, but I won't worry about how they could have used generative AI to help them.
I mean, this might be a kind of a consideration in terms of how we put together teaching teams around some of these topics. There's a comment in the chat saying a really fantastic and fascinating talk, Carol, and I think we'd all completely agree with that. I think we're going to take a quick breather, but a quick round of applause again for Carol for really kind of kicking things off and talking about an important aspect of this, which is how we involve the students.